السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
وعليكم السلام.
وعليكم السلام.
It's recording already. Just a second. Sound is loud and clear?
يا الشيخ أولا الشيخ.
Okay. طيب. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. We are still in the section of mentioning what is najis and what is tahir. And I think the last thing we reached, al-muta'affin al-bayd. We mentioned last class uh, the things that are najis, and we're near the end of the list. Sorry, let me just move this off the table. And we said that eggs, last sentence, eggs, if they have spoiled and gone rotten, then they are najis, as opposed to their normal state. So eggs, even if they are raw, some people might think that eggs are najis in their raw form due to the fact that they are, uh, it has some connection to blood. Uh, but they are halal and tahir even when they are uncooked, as long as they have not gone rotten. If they are rotten, then they are najis. And the last thing to mention in the list of najasat, والقيء والقلس. So vomit and al-qalas. Al-qalas is basically your stomach acids, or what some people might know it if they have acid reflux. It's a acidic, usually clear, sometimes a little yellow liquid um, that comes out of the stomach sometimes. Both of these are najis. However, when it comes to vomit, the vomit is najis when it is changed. So if I eat an apple, right, and it comes out 5 minutes later, obviously it's going to be chewed up and a little different in color. But if it's still the same apple, then it is tahir, because at that point it is not called vomit, even though the stomach has, you know, taken it out of the body. It only becomes najis when it is changed, when it is all these different things from your stomach change the color and the taste, and it becomes unrecognizable. Then it becomes najis. So if somebody vomits um, and it's still the same, it's still pretty much the exact same thing that came in, and it lands on your shoes or something else, then it is not najis and prayer would be valid. وما عدا المذكورات فهو طاهر. We mentioned last class that even though the chapter is called, طاهر things, الأعيان الطاهرة والأعيان النجسة, it's basically just a mention of what is najis, because it is much easier and much shorter to just mention it. And so we can see after he's finished this list, he says, and everything other than what is mentioned, then it is tahir. So there's no need to memorize what is tahir. As long as you memorize what is najis, then everything else is tahir. Subsection, a fasl في ذكر المعفوات. A subsection in mentioning what is made an exception, or what is allowed from the najasat. So there are certain things that are najas, but the specific time or the specific circumstance or the amount that it may come in uh, will make it acceptable. Why? Each one has a different reason, and we're going to mention them one by one. So the first one is يعفى عن قدر درهم من دم أو قيح أو صديد. So a dirham's worth of blood or pus. Uh, a dirham obviously is the silver coin, which was originally used by the Persian Empire but adopted by the Muslims. It's around 3.1 grams of silver. Uh, if a dirham's worth of blood or pus is on the skin or clothes, or to be more specific, if it's less than a dirham's worth, then the salah would still be acceptable. Obviously, it's recommended to remove it. However, if sometimes one dot or two dots of blood can go unnoticed. If I have a cut open in my arm and there's blood flowing from it. As we know, flowing blood is najis. However, what is made an exception is if it's less than 8 dirhams worth. So if my blood is flowing and it's only, a few drops, 3 or 4 drops, then this is an exception. It's called a ma'fu. Now, a general rule of thumb to know the um, the measurement of a dirham, because nowadays we don't have dirhams in circulation. You could compare it to a coin, a normal small coin, but different countries have different sized coins. Some of them can be much bigger. A general rule of thumb is to use the nail of your thumb. So if you look at the nail of your thumb and you compare it to the amount of blood, if it is more than the size of your nail, then it is probably wajib uh, um, to remove it and it's not accepted. But if it's less than the size of your nail, then it is from the ma'fuwat. It is from the things that are allowed. And the same thing goes for al-qayh wal-sadid. And we mentioned what the difference between them is. Pus can come out in a more thicker yellow substance, or in a different form, it can be a little more um, transparent and thin, less viscous. But uh, they're both najis. So if it comes out of a burn or something, or if it comes from you touch someone else who has it on their arm, it doesn't have to be yours. It's if it's less than that, we treat it the same way as blood. So less than 8 dirhams worth. And in fact, some of the other fuqaha from other madhab would argue that um, this rule of using a dirham's worth to know if something is accepted or not can actually apply to other najasat. So Ibn Taymiyyah, for example, he applies this to urine as well. He does qiyas on blood and on al-qayh al-sadid, but we don't have that in our position. The second thing that is an exception. أو أثر الذباب الواقع على البدن والثوب من النجاسة. So the traces of najasa that can come from a fly, or as a matter of fact, any other insect. So flies can be around najasat. They can be attracted to the feces of animals. They can be attracted to all sorts of things in the trash. Uh, Trace amounts, very, very tiny amounts that aren't seen by the human eye, will be stuck to their feet and their body in general. Because it's almost impossible for the human to track this, to track if there's najasa on him in such a small size, this is accepted. So anything that may or may not, um, basically, if you have waswasa, someone who has waswasa and he sees a fly around the feces and then he sees that fly on his arm, he does not need to wash his arm because it's impossible to know if he has najasa or not. The third exception, السلس. وعلى السلس إن لازم كل يوم ولو قطرة. So سلس البول, is the basically when urine leaks out of the body, uh, out of the appropriate parts of the body. We talked about this in depth in al-Akhdari, and we'll talk about it again. The human body, specifically those who have certain illnesses, but more commonly those who are very old in age, they can have trouble holding in their urine. Sometimes it will leak out in a few drops without them noticing. Or sometimes even if they notice, it's unintentional. And it can happen a lot. It can happen every hour, every 2 hours, depending on the person. This is an exception, but we have certain conditions. So, when is as-salas um, an exception or not? إن لازم كل يوم ولو قطرة. Meaning, if it is there every day, even if it's a drop, right? So some people might have an episode with as-salas. Uh, and I keep saying as-salas because I'm not sure what the exact English word is for it. But when urine leaks, some people might have it, it happens once a week, once every 2 weeks, once every 3 days. Sometimes it happens once and then it doesn't happen again. These are not an exception. The reason is the exception here in the Sharia is because of difficulty. When it is present every day, there is great difficulty on the person to keep making wudu. However, if it happens to you once, or it doesn't happen that often, then you should make wudu and you should remove that. Forget wudu because we're talking about the physical najasa here. Wudu is another aspect. When we talk about the physical najasa aspect, that it's going to be on your clothes. If it's unintentional urination, it's going to be a bit on your clothes, and that has to be removed because it's a physical impurity. However, if it happens once a week, it's not considered by these conditions to be difficult. It's considered doable to remove it every time it happens. When does it become considered too difficult and an exception has to be made? When it happens every day. If it's happening every day, uh, at least one drop, ولو قطرة. If every day one tiny drop is coming out or more, if that tiny drop is coming out every day, then this exception is made for that person, and he's not expected to remove that physical najasa. As for making the wudu and not, we discussed that in al-Akhdari. Some of you may remember this. I assume I think two of you were present. I think Ismail was not here in al-Akhdari, but where's the annotations? So if we discuss the time of day as a circle, so in a normal clock, we have 12 hours and we go around the circle 2 full times. This is a different clock. This is a clock with 24 hours. So we have midnight here, and then we go to noon, and then back to midnight, right? This is a full day. So we have 5 prayers, obviously. We have Subh here. We have Dhuhr at noon. Then we have Asr short after. And then Maghrib. And then Isha. We have a certain measurement of time called Waqt al-Salah, the time of prayer. What is the time of prayer? The time of prayer is from Dhuhr. Dhuhr is technically the first Salah. From Dhuhr all the way to Fajr or Subh. This is um, this is what we call the time of prayer. As you can see, it takes around 3/4 of the day. Um, Obviously, it would depend on where you live, but just a general idea. Now, if salas is happening during the time of prayer, and we're going to cover this in detail, even though we covered it in al-Akhdari, and we're going to cover it again in the subsections that are about to come in the next few classes when it comes to nullifiers of wudu. If the salas happens during the time of prayer, or it happens most of the time of prayer, then an exception is made. Whereas we have a second view within fiqh that salas has to be present throughout most of the day, the 24 hours, um, not just the time of prayer. But the mashhur is dhuhr till subh. Now, this is important because um, as a shar'i piece of terminology, when we talk about days and we talk about nights and we talk about the times of prayer, they do not always correspond exactly to how we use them in the modern day, whether it's English or other languages, even in Arabic. Usually when we say day, even in Arabic, we say yom, I'm talking to anyone. What is understood is from midnight to the next midnight. This is obviously not how we treat it in the Sharia. In the Sharia, we treat it, if we're talking about a day, the day ends at subh. Because for any given day, let's say Monday, the first of Ramadan. The first of Ramadan, when does it start? When do we pray Taraweeh? We pray Taraweeh the night before the day, right? So the eve, if we have Monday is the first day of fasting, then Ramadan is beginning the evening of the end of Sunday, right? We call that the eve of Monday, Laylat al-Ithnain, or we say the Layla, the night of the first of Ramadan. The night of the first of Ramadan is before the day of the first of Ramadan. And then when Maghrib Adhan hits, the second day of Ramadan enters. Uh, there's when we talk about fasting, right? When we go to the chapter of fasting, we discuss this detail. But in other chapters of fiqh, when we talk about zakah, when we talk about hajj, when we talk about a million other things, even when we come to like financial transactions and judicial rulings, the books were written in a time, the fiqh books were written in a time where this type of Shari'i terminology was still common. The reader nowadays, if detail is not given and reminded every time and again, he may have a wrong perception of these terminologies. When we talk about waqt al-salah, the time of prayer, if I say this, most listeners will assume that the time of prayer is the time of prayer, meaning the time of dhuhr. The time of praying dhuhr, that's the time of praying of dhuhr. They don't have this understanding that when we say the time of prayer, this is what is meant from dhuhr till al-subh. Al-dhuhr is the first salah. When Jibreel came down, alayhi salam, and he taught the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to pray in the famous hadith that is narrated in the Sahihain and the Muwatta, he starts with al-dhuhr. Al-dhuhr was the first salah that was prayed. And therefore, it is the first salah. And when you are making up your prayers, if you have many prayers to make up, you have to start with the first one. We start with al-dhuhr. You pray the first dhuhr you missed, and then the first asr you missed, and then the first maghrib you missed, and so on and so forth. You don't start with al-subh. People assume it's al-subh because they have this understanding that the day starts at midnight and ends at midnight. And if we go by that, if we start from here, then the first salah we hit is al-subh. So it's very important to differentiate between Shari'i terminologies and uh, modern terminologies because the detail is not always given. So the teacher might mention it once, but it's not going to be mentioned every single time such words come up. Anyways, that was quite the tangent, but let's get back to the physical impurities. So we talked about salas al-bawl, and we're going to talk about وأثر الجروح والقروح والدمامل إلا من دمل واحد فجر اختيارا. So boils, warts, burns, anything that forms, some sort of bubble or pimple on your body. Um, if you do not pop it, at some point it's going to burst by itself. When I say burst, I don't mean, explode, but it's going to start leaking. The fluid that is trapped in there, it's going to eventually, um, leak on its own. You don't always know when that happens. Sometimes you look at your finger where there was a wart, and you find that At some point, it was opened and the liquid has leaked. The fluid, your bodily fluid has leaked from it, but you don't know when. Are you going to repeat all your prayers? No, because this is an exception. So any traces from cuts, wounds, um, uh, there's all sorts of different words based on the reason. If it's a burn, if it's a wart, if it's a pimple, if it's a uh, they're all basically things on the skin that have fluids in them. These are an exception as well. However, there is a condition إلا من دمل واحد فجر اختيارا. If it is popped, if this pimple or wart or burn is popped by choice, then it is not an exception, right? Because it's done on purpose. The reason there's a rukhsah here is because, like we said, you don't always know when it happened. It usually happens when you don't notice. You only realize much later. However, if you're doing it on purpose, you know exactly when it happened, and you know exactly it wasn't something you couldn't avoid. It wasn't something that is difficult for you if you're doing it on purpose. وكل ما يحصر الاحتراز منه. Another exception, everything that is difficult to avoid. And we say everything, it doesn't necessarily mean everything, but usual things, and we're going to list them, such as the thobe of the murdi'ah, the clothes of a wet nurse. Again, this is a bit outdated with modern diapers, but back in the day, when they would hold babies, babies urinate and defecate basically whenever they want. Back in the day, women or wet nurses, and we say wet nurses here an example, but it can be anyone who holds the baby often, even if it's the mother holding the baby every day, and every day there's a bit of urine getting on her clothes. This is hard to avoid because she doesn't have the option of, just abandoning the child. The child must be held. It's part of the responsibilities of a human, and therefore it's a difficulty that can't be avoided, the urination from the child. Therefore, this is an exception. وَزَبَّالٍ وَجَزَّارٍ. So, a zabbal is someone who collects garbage or tends to garbage and waste. And a jazzar is a butcher. Butchers, they get blood on them all the time. Their clothes are always filled with blood, as I'm sure you can imagine just from um, the action of cutting a sheep's neck. It's going to get blood everywhere. Even if you attempt to avoid it, it's still going to get on you at some level. Because you're not just doing one sheep. You're not just carrying one baby for one day. You're not just collecting one garbage bag. This is something that you're doing all the time. So these three, there's an exception made for the najasa from a baby. There's an exception made for the najasa in waste, and there's an exception for the najasa that happens when butchering animals. However, when it comes to all of these, the exception is only valid if one thing is done. If an attempt is made to avoid the najasa. If you're getting the najasa on you on purpose, then there's no exception. If you're a butcher and for whatever reason you're slaughtering the sheep above your head and you want the blood to go all over your clothes, then there's no exception made. Similarly, if you're not standing away from the direction of the blood, there has to be a minimal effort of avoiding the najasa, not just for the butcher, but also for the garbage man and the wet nurse. The najasa has to be avoided to some extent. If it's not being avoided, then no exception is made for them. Because again, the rukhsah, the reason for the rukhsah is because it is difficult to avoid. If no attempt is made at avoiding it to begin with, then what's the point of the rukhsah? It makes no sense. Amongst other things that are difficult to avoid, وما يصيب في الطريق من الطين وماء بسبب مطر أو رش إذا اختلط بنجاسة. If you are walking in a road and it is muddy, or there are puddles. It's because it's raining and there's just puddles forming everywhere. If you're gonna walk through that road, you're gonna get mud on you. You're gonna get water on you. Even if it's not from you directly, someone beside you is gonna be walking and he gets water all over you. Or a car drives beside you, and when a car drives beside you and there's water, it just splashes all over your clothes. If najasa is mixed with that mud or that water, if you're in the West and you're walking on the side of the road, there's definitely going to be some amount of urine or feces from a dog because people walk their dogs all the time. There's always stuff on the pavement, on the street. If it's mixed with that water, it rains and the street floods and that feces mixes with the water and someone splashes you with that water, then that is an exception made because it is difficult to avoid. You have to be outside. You have to go places. You can't just, you have to buy food. You have to live a normal life. You can't avoid it. You can't avoid life just because there's a bit of rain or mud in the street. إلا إذا غلبت أو أصاب عينها. Except if it becomes most of it. Meaning, uh, if most of what is splashed on you is najasa, right? Then it's a different case. If the puddle, again, let's imagine a huge puddle of water, and in that puddle there is dog feces. Now, when the water is sitting there and the feces is sitting there, it's going to the feces is going to disintegrate and mix in with the water to a tiny bit. The water is going to change its taste, its color. It's going to become najis. The water is the exception. However, if for whatever reason, whatever scenario, what splashes on you is the feces itself, then there's no exception. The exception is for the water or the mud. The feces itself or the najasa, whatever it is in the scenario, the najasa itself is not the exception. What is accepted is the water or mud that mixes with it. Similarly, if we have a mix of the two of them, we have a mix of water and feces, or we have a mix of mud and feces. If most of what splashes on you or most of what you step on, if more than 50% of it is najasa, then we treat it as if the whole thing is najis. Because of the قاعدة فقهية, the legal rule, uh, الأمر للغالب, meaning the ruling uh, is attached to the majority. So if you have a mixture of things and most of it is najasa, then we treat it as if it is najis. Again, this is specifically for this scenario we're talking about. If most of what hits you or you step on is najis, then it is not an exception. However, if most of it is water or mud, then an exception is made. ويطهر متنجس إذا غسل بطهور دون نية وعصر إذا انفصل الماء طاهرا. Okay, we mentioned all these najasas and all these exceptions. How do we know if something becomes طاهر? ويطهر متنجس, something that is متنجس. If I have clothes and that clothes have najasa on them, they have blood on them. How do I make it طاهر? First of all, it has to be washed with water. إذا غسل بطهور. It has to be washed with something طهور. And as we mentioned, the only thing طهور is water, as we mentioned in the first chapter. دون نية, meaning, unlike wudu, unlike ghusl, unlike salah, when we're removing a physical impurity, a niyyah is not necessary. If you remove it by accident, I don't know how this happens, but if you remove it with water by accident, um, or you leave it somewhere and it rains and it washes away by itself, or you wash it but not with the intention of removing the najasa, but only with the intention of something else. All these scenarios, it still becomes tahir. The thing is still cleaned. So a niyyah, an intention, is not necessary when washing away a physical impurity. وعصر إذا انفصل الماء طاهرا, meaning, so we've washed this clothing. Is it enough to if I have a shirt with blood on it, is it enough to pour a bucket of water? I pour a bucket of water and I squeeze it and I wrinkle the shirt to get all the water out. How do I know when it's tahir? When I squeeze out the water and the water comes out of the shirt, tahir. So if I have a bloody shirt and I wash it, I put water on it and it's squeezed the first time. The first time, usually, the blood is still going to be coming out with the water. The second time I wash it, I put water on it and I squeeze it, a little less blood will come out with the water. A third time, a fourth time, at some point, the water is going to be squeezed out. Tahir. The water is going to be squeezed out and the water itself will be pure because it will not have changed color or changed taste or changed smell. So that's how you know when something is tahir. So whatever najasa there is, blood, urine, um, uh, you know, all these things we mentioned, this is the method of washing them. For all of them, there's no necessity for a niyyah, and it has to be washed with water until the water comes out najas. Now, sometimes things stain, right? Like blood. Blood can stain things. If you're washing the shirt and you just keep putting it in water and squeezing it, or you just put it in the washing machine 10, 20 times, whatever, and there's still a bit of red on it. As long as the water is coming out tahir and there's no taste, there's no physical, impurity left on it, the color in this scenario is an exception. Even if the color of blood remains, we treat it as if it is tahir because this is considered too difficult to remove. If something is staining and you just keep washing it and the color won't come off. And that is the end of today's subsection, which is the exceptions from physical impurities. We have a few minutes for questions. I know I usually rush you guys to ask questions, but we have a few minutes if you guys want to ask anything.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Alaikum.
Sheikh, I always have confusion with the purity of blood, whether it breaks the wudu or
So,
it doesn't break.
sorry, what?
Sometimes I,
Yeah. Sorry, what did you say?
sometimes I,
Purity of what?
blood.
Yes.
So sometimes I have not seen blood listed in the nullifiers of wudu, and sometimes we see if it is flowing or it is more than a particular amount, it is a najasa and it breaks the wudu. So I am just confused with blood, whether it breaks or it doesn't break.
So blood itself, it's in your body, right? You're filled with blood. What makes it najis when it is flowing? Or in Arabic, we say ad-dam al-masfuh. Masfuh is usually, you know, we say safaha, someone, cut you with something, or blood is flowing. When it's flowing, it becomes a physical impurity. Now, in the madhab, it's not a nullifier of wudu. The wudu is not invalidated by the flow of blood. Unlike the Hanafis. The Hanafis, they say it's a physical impurity, but it also nullifies wudu. We don't say it's a nullifier of wudu, we just say it's a physical impurity. So if you're about to pray and you have wudu and there's blood flowing from you, you just have to wash off that blood, right? But the blood itself does not, like you have to wash it off of your arm because it is a physical impurity, but it does not nullify your wudu. You don't have to do your wudu again. If you ask a Hanafi, they'll tell you to do your wudu again. So that might be why you have confusion about this.
Yes, Sheikh. Now I understood. It
Yes.
is najasa, but it doesn't nullify.
Yes.
Jazakallah, Sheikh.
And we'll mention specific scenarios of blood. We mentioned this exception today of when there's only a few drops of blood. An exception can be made. Similar exception can be made with nosebleeds. if your nose is bleeding during salah, right? It's a when I say a common occurrence, it happens to people. It's not exactly rare. People have nosebleeds. So it happens during salah sometimes. There's a very specific step-by-step um, protocol that you have to take if your nose starts bleeding in salah. And we'll get to that when we talk about wudu and nullifiers of wudu. طيب, is there anything else today?
Sheikh, can we also talk about that droplets of urine, which many people ask in the questions when we're doing the nullifiers?
So what's your question exactly? So we talked about salis al-bawl, when urine is leaking, there's two aspects of it. The first aspect is the physical urine itself. It doesn't have to be washed off. And the second aspect is redoing your wudu. So we talked about today the conditions of it as a physical impurity. And we'll talk about what happens in terms of repeating your wudu, when it comes to the nullifiers of wudu, right? The rule of the physical impurity is mentioned here, and the rule of redoing your wudu is mentioned later. And that's what happens when you have a hadath, when you have the incidents that break salah, because there's two sides to them. Whether you're urinating or, defecating, or whether there's, semen after intercourse, all these things, they're physical impurities, but they also break wudu or break your ghusl. So there's always two aspects to discuss for them. So whether it comes to urine, defecation, other fluids, there's exceptions for them when it comes to being a physical impurity, and there's might be different exceptions for them when it comes to redoing your wudu. Um, so that's something to keep in mind. Just like we said with, blood, it's a physical impurity, but it doesn't necessarily nullify your wudu. So it's two sides that you have to separate in your mind. But if you want to clarify your question a little more, you can send a message right after class because it's going to end in a few seconds. So, sorry, just 1 second. Yes, so yeah, it's going to end in a moment. So, barakallahu feekum. Feel free to ask me anything later on. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam, Sheikh.